Hello, everyone. This is Professor Gabriel Selassie, and today we are going to talk about white identity politics. But before we get started, I would just like to mention a few things and then get to a question that I'm going to have you hold on until later in the lecture. First of all, what we're going to deal with today is a very unique problem in the history of the world. And what I mean by that is that at one particular point in world history, there were only black people that existed in the world. Black people, or human beings, I should say, came from Africa. And what this means is that over time, as Africans with dark skin left Africa and moved to more temperate climates where there was very little sunshine, like in Scandinavia or on the islands of England and Scotland and Wales and Ireland. Black people began to lose their dark skin pigmentation, and over time, we have the variety of different colors that manifested themselves. This is an interesting part of human physiology that learns to adapt to different geographies over time. So, what we have here are Africans who now have lighter skin. They have the same general physiology. Their DNA traces back to Africa. But these people simply have different hair texture, different eye color, some different strands in their DNA, and their different skin color is obviously different. But these people are generally the same. They're cousins. So then, how do we get to a point where we pay somebody more money for the same job because they are white than we do for a person who is black? How does this happen? Life outcomes for whites are much greater than they are for blacks. Wealth in America is in white hands. You'll have a white family with no college education who will have more wealth than a black couple with a college education in America. How does this happen? How does this happen where all the benefits in our society accrue for simply having ancestors who migrated out of Africa and went to places where they didn't have as much sunshine and needed to have much, much more vitamin D in their system so their skin lightened to capture that vitamin D? This is a fascinating subject that we are going to explore in this lecture. How is it that some people, because they have lighter skin, accrued just more benefits than those people who have darker skin? So what we have to acknowledge here at this point, I think, is that there is a difference between those people who have extremely light skin, who we call white people, and those people who have dark skin that we generally call black, brown, and others. So, what I want you to do at this particular moment is take out a pencil, pen, paper, and write down this central question. And as we're spooling through the video, you can stop it and you can pause at any moment and you can reflect and think and write things down, or you can just do them all while you're listening, what have you. The question is, what is white culture? If someone were to come from Mars, land in Washington, D.C., or in your backyard and said, I want to know what is it that makes up white culture, what would you tell them? Now, to just give you something to balance this on, I'm just going to ask you another question that you can think about for a moment. What happens if that same spaceship landed, but they ask you a very different question, like, what is black culture? Probably right away, you would probably write down 4 or 5 things, and you would probably start off with music, foods, sports, hair, right? All kinds of things, fashion, all kinds of things might trickle into your mind. The question, therefore, is that why is it, and I do this in every class that I've had at City College on Black politics. The question is, why is it that in every single class when I ask this question, I get rounds and rounds of answers of what black culture is, but the students struggle to deliver what is white culture? So when we get to the end of our lecture, I'm going to ask the question again, and I'm going to want to see what you and how you answered. So to kick this off, we're going to delve into the idea that at a time in our history, there was no such thing as white people. Now, we know that there were white people because obviously a person has lighter skin, but what I'm talking about here is that there was a point in our world where there was a choice that people had to make about skin color, and they chose white identity politics. Okay, so let's delve into some of the significant events. We have these 2 bookmarks from 1812 to 1828. In 1812, we fought a war with Great Britain. This was our second war. We fought a Revolutionary War, and then we fought the War of 1812. And then we moved into 1816, where we were feeling pretty good about ourselves. We had gotten beyond the war. The country was slowly starting to come together. The Erie Canal was built, and so we were constructing infrastructure to move goods and materials around the country. We passed a milestone in 1826 where Thomas Jefferson and John Adams both died. They were founding fathers, so this kind of signaled a passing generation and the taking over by a new generation of Americans. 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence in 1826. And then in 1828, Andrew Jackson is elected president, ushering in what I call white identity politics. So to give us some way to kind of conceptualize how white identity politics played out over time, we're going to take a look at 2 elections. One is the election of Barack Obama against Mitt Romney and Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. So the election between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney in 2012 gave us some very interesting statistics about white people and black people and Latinos and Asians, etc., who voted. 56% of white people voted for Mitt Romney. And you probably will say to yourself, well, there was a choice between Obama and Romney, and it kind of split down the middle with white people. But take a look at this. 95% of black people voted for Obama, 82% of Latinos, and others, and this is Native Americans and Asians, voted for Obama. What is it about black people that almost everybody voted for Barack Obama who voted? Large percentage of Latinos and Native Americans and Asians. This is white identity politics. People identified with Barack Obama and his blackness rather than identifying with Mitt Romney. Now, you can probably suppose that, well, look, Barack Obama was much more intelligent and all those kinds of things and a better candidate and what have you, and I agree to that. I'm not saying that Barack Obama was perfect because he certainly didn't do a whole lot of stuff for black people, but he held himself with dignity. There were no scandals, no issues. It was a solid 8 years of his presidency. He was an upstanding and outstanding president from a certain perspective. Again, didn't do a whole lot of stuff for black people, but that's a whole different discussion. The Trump Clinton presidency, and I just have these two statistics here because I think this says something that when Hillary Clinton ran, she only gained 37% of the white vote. So what this means is that a whole lot of white people decided that they're going for Donald Trump. And I think this next photograph is illustrative of what I mean here. What is the difference that you see in these two photographs? I'm going to give you a second to ponder that because it might be rather difficult. The photograph on the left are the interns, college students basically, interns, for the Congress that are Democrats. The photograph on the right are essentially the same interns, but for Republicans. So what do these two photographs tell you about American politics and the two parties, the two major parties, Democrats and Republicans? You have one party that represents probably what America really looks like, and the other party essentially doesn't. This is what I call white identity politics. You could not have walked into this room on the right and said, my gosh, there's a problem with this picture. So we have to ask ourselves, what is white identity politics? And what this is that when you go to vote, you vote white. When you vote on issues, you vote on issues that will benefit white people. Everything that you do that involves politics, who you're voting for, who you send money to for candidates, are all white people. You identify with issues that are germane to the white community. And conversely, we could probably argue here that the opposite of this is black identity politics, Latinx identity politics, Asian identity politics, and alike. Right now, we have a country that is divided between white identity politics and everybody else's identity politics. The question is, where did it come from? Where? When did it get started? What made people decidedly think that they were in fact white people? We can also ask ourselves, how does it affect others? When we behave politically in this manner. I'll just give you one example. We have in this country a very poor health system. If you're poor, you probably have really crappy health care. You might have Medicare or Medicaid if you're in some certain states. But if you're really poor, you have really crappy health care. If you are in England and you are very poor, you have pretty decent health care. Same thing with Canada. Same thing with most modern industrial countries. If you break your arm, you're going to get it taken care of. If you have cancer, you're going to get it taken care of, but not in the United States. And the question is, why not? The reason for this is fairly simple. White people do not want other people who are not white to have health insurance because they have talked themselves into believing that other people, non-whites, will scam the system and take advantage of the system and get something for free. This is absolutely absurd, but this is exactly what they believe. Now, what does this mean? It means because white people are the majority group, not for long, but they are now the majority group, they consistently vote to make sure that there's no national health care system because they don't want those Mexicans coming over from Mexico and getting free health care. So what they decide to do is deny themselves health care to make sure that they deny other people health care. So it's not like that white people are immune from death. The opioid crisis has ravaged white America all across America. and they can't get any help for it. Thousands and thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of white people have died from overdose of opioids and alike. If you go to most Republican-controlled states, West Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, and alike, you will find a lot of really diseased and poor white people who don't have health care, who suffer from all kinds of maladies, and they consistently vote to make sure that there's no health care because they don't want Mexicans to have health care or those black people to have health care. What is the saying? You cut off your nose to spite your face? Throw the baby out with the bathwater? That's exactly what's going on. This is white identity politics. Now, none of this stuff is true. If you're not an American citizen, you can't get jack in this country but some bare benefits. So for example, if you get run over by a car, they have to take you to the hospital and fix you. That's just cruel and inhumane to not do that. But this is what white identity politics is. You want to make sure that you're going to keep other people from getting things that most people in the world call just and humane, health insurance and alike. We begin white identity politics with Andrew Jackson. Now, I'm going to say this, that in this class, we're looking at slave petitions, so it's not as if in the 18th century, in the 1700s, people didn't understand that there were white people and black people. They did. And there was a form of white identity politics back then. But here's the difference. Throughout much of our nation's history, as people poured in from Europe, there were different kinds of white people. There were Germans, Irish, Italians, English, French, Spanish, right? All kinds of different kinds of white people. And if your ancestors were not white, Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and what I mean by that is if they didn't come from England, and if they weren't Protestant, they were held in suspicion. In America, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants disliked Germans. They were suspicious of them. They disliked Irish people. They called them black people and dogs. And I'm using a very polite word when I say black people. They called them sometimes the smoked Irish. They considered Italians to be black people because they were dark-skinned, a lot of them, southern Italy, swarthy, as they said. So there was some distinction between white people. There's a really good, interesting movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, The Gangs of New York. If you watch that movie, you'll notice that there are several gangs, and the main gang that hates everybody is a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant gang that's led by Daniel Day-Lewis. And the gang that they're fighting against is an interracial gang of Irish people and black people. So what I am saying to you is that in our history, we've known that there were white people, and we know that there were black people, but we just kind of thought that there were some white people that were demonstrably better and different than other white people until Andrew Jackson showed up. Andrew Jackson, 1767 to 1845, he was the 7th president of the United States, 1829 to 1837. Probably more than any other president, he was most elected by popular vote. And what I mean by this is the United States has gone through several manifestations of how we elect presidents. Sometimes we elected them by the Electoral College, where a group of people just got together and decided who the president was going to be. Other times we had national elections, and some states ballots were printed, some states ballots were not printed. But we were slowly trying to get the election right, and not everyone could vote. Women certainly couldn't vote. Slaves couldn't vote. Some white people couldn't vote. You had to pay your taxes, pay a poll tax maybe if necessary. own property. There were usually qualifications for voting because they just didn't want other people to vote. Andrew Jackson was a slave owner. He was famous for his exploits in the War of 1812. He was elected to Congress as a representative from Tennessee, served in the United States Senate. Here's his home called Hermitage in Tennessee. Stately manner, he was in fact a wealthy slave owner, as most U.S. presidents were. If you go to New Orleans and go to Jackson Square, you will see a statue that was erected after Andrew Jackson had died. The election of 1824 pit John Quincy Adams, the son of John Adams, against Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson was a Democrat who represented the conservative wing of America, and John Quincy Adams, who represented the Nationalist Party and represented what I would call the liberal wing of the Republican Party. We are moving in a time period in 1824 where property and religious rights are going to be challenged for voting. And what this means is that we're going to usher in what we call common man politics. We're going to hear the voice of the common man in politics. So in order to have property and have the right to vote, you had to be fairly uncommon. You had to have some money. But if we rescind property and religious rights and allow just average common people to vote, we then call this common man politics. What common man politics was essentially enlarging the white voter base, eliminating black people from voting, Indians from voting, anybody who was not designated as a white person. So then this begs the question is that if you were not one of these white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, but you had pale skin like an Irishman who were white, but they were Catholic and they were not, so they weren't Protestants, and they're not Anglo-Saxons, they're Celtics. So then how does one then get the right to vote? So what we're seeing here is the enlargement of the white voting base, denying other people, excluding women, blacks, Indians, the right to vote. And when I mean blacks, I mean free black people. There were black people in America who were never slaves, ever, and there were black people who were slaves. So we're talking about free black people here. Jackson led the overall voting in 1824 by 38,000 votes. And there was a dispute within the Electoral College. And this went to the House of Representatives, and John Quincy Adams struck a deal, and the House of Representatives elected him president over Andrew Jackson. Jackson's people called this the corrupt bargain. 4 years pass, and we have another election in 1828. Again, John Quincy Adams versus Andrew Jackson. This campaign was called by many people as the dirtiest campaign up to this point in American history. There were changes made to the Electoral College where the people making the selections were elected for the first time. This is the first time where we have organized elections, barbecues, slogans, dinners, parades, trying to drum up support. The way that things used to work is that if you were running for president, you didn't do anything. You didn't campaign, you didn't give speeches. You didn't want to appear that you actually wanted the job because that would have been unseemly. Not until 1828, where Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams actually went out and tried to drum up support. Jackson was accused by the Quincy Adams group as a slave trader, which he was, a murderer, which he was, a gambler. They said that his mother was a prostitute, and I'm using really nice language here, that his father was half black, half white. So the sentiment is that he was a half-breed, part black. And of course, this is white identity politics. His wife was a bigamist. And what they mean by this is that Andrew Jackson actually married his wife not knowing that she was still married to someone else whom she thought she had a divorce already finished. Andrew Jackson accused John Quincy Adams of being a pimp for the czar, installing gambling tables at the White House. They called him an embezzler, all kinds of things. So what did this mean? Andrew Jackson swept the election by 178 electoral votes to Adams' 83. Trounced him. So Andrew Jackson assumed the presidency as a Democrat. Now, I have to just say this again. This is not the same Democratic Party that we have today. There are entirely two different Democratic parties. The Democratic Party has a history of racism, the Klan members and all that kind of stuff, but it's two entirely different parties today. The Democrats, under Andrew Jackson, swept into power. Their power base, or their political base, were white, Southern, and with a sprinkling of New Yorkers. Their enemies were wealthy people, the elites, other religious denominations like Catholics, blacks, women, and Native Americans. This is their enemy. And the Democrats are going to do everything in their power to try to eliminate these people from and keep them from having the right to vote in the case of women. They claimed to be the party of Thomas Jefferson, which they were, claimed to be a party of working men. They supported slavery. They were against women having the right to vote and other rights. They were anti-church establishment. And they believed that government should not have a role to play in society. They feared taxes and opposed government spending. Today, this is to a degree, the Republican platform. Oppose taxes, oppose government spending, laissez-faire government, right? And they've been working solidly to try to deny and keep people from voting. Now, they say all of these things. Republicans spend just as much money as Democrats so that's not really true. This is stuff that's lip service. They don't mean any of that stuff like we oppose taxes. Yeah, they oppose taxes for the wealthy. They make everybody else pay taxes, but they oppose taxes for the wealthy. And they spend much, much more money, particularly on stuff like bombs and all that kind of stuff, rather than on people. Between 1830 and 1850, we're going to see an influx of immigrants coming from Europe. Some from elsewhere, but mostly from Europe. About 2.3 million immigrants come to America from Ireland, Germany, Scotland, Scandinavia, etc. We're also going to see migration in the United States where people are moving off farms and moving to urban areas, so cities are going to swell up. So what this means is that you have lots of Europeans, and like I said, some coming from places like Ireland who are not considered to be white people. And so what you have are lots of people with really pale skin coming to America who are looked upon with suspicion. They're coming from Europe because of things like in Ireland, famine is ravaging Ireland. The potato famine in 1845 is going to result in about 1.7 million Irish men and women fleeing into the United States. And then after that, about another 4.5 million Irish will immigrate. By 1870s, the Irish make up about 20% of New York City's population. That's a huge number, but this also means that that's a big voting bloc. So what's going to happen here is that white Anglo-Saxon Protestant politicians are going to look at this big voting bloc and say, my God, if I can get these people to vote and they vote for me, I can keep winning elections. So there's going to be a political move to turn non-white people into white people, like the Irish, like the Italians. There's an excellent book written by David Roediger called The Wages of Whiteness. And what Roediger is going to argue in this book, and you can, I think, pick this up in LA City College or get it from the public library, is that workers will use whiteness to elevate themselves above blackness. White identity politics is being created during the age of Jackson. Poor European immigrants are going to come to this country, realize that there's no profit in being black, that the dominant white Anglo-Saxon Protestants control everything in the United States, and they're going to identify with those people because they have white skin. Uncertainty in America is going to cause European immigrants to try to forge solidarity with white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. Their mantra will be, I am white, free, and a citizen. Some people like Roediger argue here is that there were definitely repressed sexual fantasies which will be projected onto African Americans. And this is going to cause some problems. If you're a psychology major, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about here. You can skim through Roediger's book and get all of this stuff. There's another book by Noel Ignatieff called How the Irish Became White. Ignatieff studied the Irish in Philadelphia, and what he argued is that the first Irish that came over here mingled with black people, married black people, had kids with black people. They were anti-slavery, pro-abolition. But over time, these Irish began to move towards whiteness. The Democratic Party is going to accept the Irish vote. The Irish will establish a voting bloc in the political process. They will turn away from their anti-abolition roots and become solidly for slavery. And a lot of this is psychological. They're trying to prove that they're just as white as anybody else in America. Just to kind of give you an example of what people thought of the Irish, here is the Harper's Weekly. And this is the ignorant vote. Black person on the left and the Irish white person on the right. And look how they're drawn. Caricatures, and they look almost identical. Using alcohol to get the votes. Black person on the left, the Irish person on the right. So what this cartoon is trying to say is that the way that people, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, are trying to get votes is through alcohol, because black people and Irish people are so lame that they don't understand politics and they'll do anything just for booze. There were also negative stereotypes about other groups like Asians. Here is the Irish and the Chinese. There's an Irishman on the left, a Chinese person on the right, and Uncle Sam, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, in the middle, being devoured by these two people. And then eventually the Chinese are going to devour the Irishman. Problem solved. So what white Anglo-Saxon Protestants are thinking here is that we can get rid of our Irish problem eventually. Another drawing of the pig and the pier, the English and the Irish. The Irish is the pig and the English king. This on the right is a drawing of an Irishman who has torn up America. Look at all the broken soap and flour and sugar. And there in the background is Uncle Sam and a character by the name of John Bull, who represents England. And John Bull says to Uncle Sam, "Don't worry, I'll take care of this mess for you." This is a depiction of an Irishman, an Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and a black person in Harper's Weekly. Notice the similarities for the Irishman on the left and the black person on the right. So what we've established here is just the very locus of the difference between black identity politics, white identity politics, its history, its formation, and just some of the things that people thought about black and white people. What we're going to do next is we're going to move from here to minstrelsy to show you how blackness is then consolidated through popular culture and passed down from generation to generation.